Not every change in a marriage is loud. Sometimes it's so quiet, even the people living inside don't realize it's happening. When Lena left home to prepare for the birth of their first child, she trusted her husband Samuel would simply wait for her, quietly, faithfully. But life doesn't always work the way we expect. In the empty spaces between their routines, someone else quietly stepped in, not to replace Lena, not to cause harm, just to share the silence. What happened next wasn't betrayal. It wasn't love either. It was something even harder to explain. A small change, unnoticed by anyone, except them. This is a story about loneliness, kindness, and the moments we never talk about, but never forget. Sometimes, people don't realize when a small choice quietly changes everything. Samuel and Lena had been married for 2 years. They weren't extraordinary people, and their life wasn't filled with big events or dramatic milestones. But together, they had slowly built a peaceful routine in their modest apartment on the outskirts of a quiet Japanese city. Morning coffees, small jokes exchanged at the door, short texts in the afternoon checking in on each other. Love didn't always have to be loud. For them, it had always been soft, steady, and comforting. Their dream was simple: a small family, a stable home, and the arrival of their first child. And now, that dream was finally becoming real. As Lena's due date approached, her health became the priority. Though she still smiled, her energy grew thin. Long walks tired her out, and even the smallest household tasks seemed heavier than before. After thoughtful conversations between the two of them and with her parents, Lena decided it would be best to return to her childhood home for a while. Just to rest, just to let herself be cared for. Her parents could help her in a way Samuel couldn't, tied as he was to his demanding work schedule. Samuel didn't argue. He loved his wife. More than anything, he wanted her and their child to be safe and well. Still, when the moment finally arrived, and he watched her step onto the train with her suitcase and her swollen belly, a quiet ache settled somewhere deep inside his chest. The apartment would feel emptier without her. He knew that before he even turned the key in the door that afternoon. At first, Samuel kept busy with work. The days seemed longer, the evenings quieter. The small things Lena used to do, the neatly arranged cups, the light scent of tea brewing at dusk, those details now hung in absence. He told himself it was temporary, just a short season. Soon she would return, and everything would feel whole again. But life doesn't like to leave empty spaces for long. That morning, when Samuel wasn't expecting anyone, the doorbell rang. Standing there with a small box of pastries and an easy smile was Mirai, Lena's friend from university. She wasn't someone Samuel knew well, just a face from occasional gatherings, a name mentioned here and there in conversation. Yet here she was, cheerful as always, her presence filling the doorway like sunshine through a cracked window. Samuel chuckled despite himself. He wasn't particularly close to Mirai, but it felt rude to turn her away. He stepped aside and invited her in. What began as awkward small talk over tea quickly softened into something more natural. Mirai had an easy way about her, lighthearted but never intrusive. She laughed at herself, shared harmless little stories about her work, her neighbors, her mishaps trying to cook. Before long, Samuel found himself smiling without effort. The morning slipped by, carried on the warmth of conversation and the simple comfort of having another human presence in the room. They didn't talk about anything deep, not about loneliness, not about missing Lena. They didn't need to. The silence between topics was already speaking for them. Two people sharing tea and snacks, filling a quiet apartment with a little laughter, where before there had only been the hum of the refrigerator. When Mirai stood to leave, Samuel noticed how light the apartment felt compared to when she'd first arrived. Not just the air, something quieter, something inside himself. A momentary lift. And just like that, she was gone. The door closed. The apartment settled back into stillness, but it didn't feel quite as heavy as before. That day, Samuel ate one of the pastries Mirai had left behind. It wasn't anything special, just a soft bun, slightly sweet, not too fresh. But somehow, it tasted better than the meals he'd been forcing himself to prepare all week. Sometimes, it's not about the food. Sometimes, it's about being reminded. Someone out there is thinking of you. Some changes don't happen in a moment. They happen quietly, in the space between one doorbell and the next. The day finally came for Lena to return to her parents' home. Samuel woke up early, packed her bags carefully, making sure nothing important was left behind. He helped her into the taxi with a tenderness that had no words, just quiet gestures, hands on her shoulders. One more look before she closed the door. He tried to keep busy, but even paperwork felt heavier in his hands. Every habit, every corner of the house seemed to echo Lena's absence. Her favorite blanket folded on the couch. The scent of her shampoo still lingering faintly in the bathroom. Even the slippers by the door felt like a quiet reminder of something missing. That afternoon, as the light softened across the windows, the doorbell rang again. Samuel wasn't expecting anyone. And yet, there stood Mirai. This time, she carried groceries. A bag of vegetables, a carton of eggs, a small bouquet of flowers she pretended wasn't for any particular reason.
I thought I'd stop by. Lena mentioned she's a little worried about you being here all alone. You know how she is,
she said, her tone light, easy. Samuel raised an eyebrow. She sent you to babysit me?
She asked me to help, not supervise. Besides, someone's got to make sure this place doesn't fall apart without her.
Her warmth made it impossible to refuse. Samuel stepped aside. She moved through the apartment with a casual ease that surprised him, slipping groceries onto counters, filling the silence with small talk about her week, her neighbor's noisy dog, the weather. Little things, harmless things. But somehow, they stitched the empty space back together. Without waiting for permission, Mirai rolled up her sleeves and started cooking. Nothing elaborate, just something simple, something warm. Rice steaming, miso soup bubbling softly. The scent filled the apartment like a soft hand smoothing the wrinkles from an anxious brow. Samuel sat nearby, watching her with quiet gratitude he didn't know how to express. And something about the simplicity of that answer settled in his chest. Not obligation, not duty, just kindness. A small offering in a quiet house. By the time dinner was ready, the apartment felt less like a place holding its breath and more like a home again. They ate together, trading light conversation over bowls of rice and soft tofu. Nothing deep, nothing complicated. But it was enough. When the dishes were done, and Mira gathered her things to leave, Samuel found himself saying, "You should come by again." If you want. No pressure.
Of course. That's what friends are for, right?
He nodded, though something in his chest felt different, lighter, less alone. And so it began, not planned, not even spoken aloud, just days filling themselves with small moments. Mirai stopping by after work with fresh ingredients. Samuel learning how to slice vegetables without embarrassment. They cooked, they cleaned, they shared meals and stories and quiet laughter over burned rice or too salty soup. At first, Samuel had been hesitant. He worried what it looked like, what Lena might think. But over time, he realized it wasn't about appearances. It wasn't even about Mirai, not really. It was about the ache of loneliness shrinking, little by little, under the weight of someone's gentle presence. They weren't filling any void meant for Lena. They weren't crossing any lines. They were simply helping each other through the silence. Samuel began noticing how much lighter the apartment felt at night when he wasn't eating alone. How much easier mornings became when there was someone else to share a coffee, even briefly. He found himself remembering how to smile without forcing it. Some connections don't need to be spoken aloud. They grow quietly, in shared spaces, in small acts of kindness, in the moments when no one is watching. Days turned into weeks. Without planning it, Samuel and Mirai settled into a rhythm. Not every day, not every evening, but often enough that it started to feel familiar, predictable, even. A gentle routine built out of nothing more than kindness and circumstance. Samuel no longer hesitated when Mirai knocked on the door. She brought vegetables from the market, fresh tofu, sometimes a dessert she said she didn't want to eat alone. Together they cooked, tidied, and filled the apartment with the small sounds of daily life. The clatter of chopsticks, the bubbling of broth, the soft thud of cabinet doors closing. What surprised Samuel most wasn't how easily this rhythm had formed. It was how natural it felt. Not forced, not strange, just human. He realized how much he'd grown used to silence in Lena's absence. Coming home to an empty apartment, eating alone in front of the television, letting the days blend together without notice. Loneliness doesn't always arrive suddenly. Sometimes it seeps in, unnoticed, until it fills the quiet corners of your life. But Mirai's presence pushed that loneliness back. Not with grand gestures, not with anything loud or obvious, just with warmth, with company, with the small, consistent reminder that people need people, even, especially in seasons like this. Over time, Samuel stopped letting her do everything alone. He picked up the knife beside her, asked how to cut vegetables properly. He washed the rice while she prepared the broth. Slowly, these shared tasks became less about necessity and more about companionship. They moved around each other with ease, passing ingredients, exchanging glances, laughing at minor kitchen disasters. It felt comfortable, safe, like they'd known this version of each other longer than they had. One day, as they sat with their bowls of miso and rice, Mirai said something that stayed with him.
You know, I think Lena would be happy knowing you're not sitting here miserable, waiting for her.
Samuel looked up, surprised. You think so?
Of course. That's why she asked me to check in, not just to help with groceries, but to make sure you were okay, really okay.
He nodded slowly, the weight of those words settling in his chest. It wasn't about replacing anyone. It wasn't about filling a space that wasn't his to fill. It was about kindness, about making it through a difficult time without letting it swallow you whole. After that conversation, something shifted. Not between them, not exactly, but within Samuel. He realized how grateful he was for this unexpected companionship, for the way Mirai showed up without expectation, for the way she carried light into the apartment when he hadn't realized how dim it had grown. Their days together remained ordinary. Cooking, cleaning, small conversations. Yet within those ordinary moments, something gentle was being built. A quiet trust. A sense of understanding that didn't require explanation. It wasn't love. It wasn't longing. It was humanity. Quiet, respectful, and real. Sometimes, healing doesn't come from big moments. It comes from someone showing up with groceries, from cooking dinner together, from washing dishes side by side in companionable silence. And slowly, without either of them intending it, the apartment no longer felt like a waiting room. It felt alive again. After several months of rest and recovery, Lena finally returned home. Samuel had been counting the days, marking them quietly in his mind with a kind of cautious hopefulness. He cleaned the apartment thoroughly before she arrived, put fresh flowers on the table, prepared her favorite meal with a level of care that surprised even himself. When Lena stepped through the door, everything felt both familiar and new. Her smile was tired but bright. Her eyes softened when she saw how neatly he had kept the place. How the kitchen seemed more organized than she remembered. How Samuel moved with a quiet confidence, serving tea, asking about her health, listening to every small detail of her time away. And Mirai was there too, of course. Lena had invited her, naturally, warmly. After all, wasn't Mirai the one who had been kind enough to keep Samuel company, to make sure he didn't fall into bad habits or let loneliness eat away at him? Lena was grateful. She said so openly, without suspicion, without hesitation. They held a small, gentle celebration. Nothing extravagant. Just tea, good food, light conversation shared between friends and family. The kind of gathering that leaves no heavy words lingering, only the comfort of laughter and the warmth of familiar faces. But even in that lightness, there were small things Lena didn't notice. How easily Samuel and Mirai moved around each other in the kitchen. How they passed ingredients, finished each other's tasks without speaking. How they shared brief, knowing glances over the stove or the sink. Not glances of secrecy or longing, nothing so dramatic. Just the quiet understanding that comes from having shared a space, from having learned each other's rhythms through days spent in simple human kindness. Lena didn't see it because there was nothing to see. No lines crossed, no hearts betrayed. Just two people who had learned how to help each other through a lonely season. It wasn't love. It wasn't a secret waiting to be revealed. It was something smaller, something quieter. A connection that had served its purpose and now would gently fade as Lena returned. As life moved forward, as new routines replaced the old. Samuel felt it too, the shift. The way Mirai smiled a little differently. That night, softer, lighter, as if she understood this was the end of something they'd both carried quietly. When she said goodbye, it wasn't with hesitation. It wasn't with sadness. It was with a calm certainty. Because sometimes, people come into our lives not to stay, but simply to help us remember how to keep going. Mirai didn't visit as often after that. Naturally, gently, she stepped back. Not out of hurt, not out of loss, out of understanding. Samuel returned to his days with Lena, now filled with new noises. The small cries of their newborn child, the soft exhaustion of shared parenthood, the laughter that slowly stitched itself back into their routines. He didn't speak of Mirai much, not because there was anything to hide, but because there wasn't anything left to say. Some connections aren't meant to be carried forward. They're meant to exist for a moment, to offer warmth, kindness, and then to fade quietly, leaving behind nothing but gratitude. And so, life moved on. Days turned to weeks. The apartment filled again with light, with noise, with the familiar chaos of family life. Samuel found himself cooking more often, tidying without complaint, remembering small habits Mirai had taught him without even realizing it. Lena smiled at these changes, pleased but never asking why they had come. Perhaps she sensed it in her own way, that her absence hadn't left a void, but had opened a space for growth. Not in betrayal, not in heartbreak, just in quiet learning, in kindness shared, in loneliness answered without expectation. Sometimes the greatest kindness isn't in big gestures, but in the quiet presence of someone who helps us feel less alone. Samuel never forgot Mirai's warmth, not as a secret, but as a gentle reminder that even in loneliness, small moments of connection can quietly heal us.